is Adam Williams, and you are listening to Retail Redeveloped. I'm extremely excited this morning to be joined by Praveen Adhi. He is a partner with McKinsey & Company, and he is the leader of McKinsey's retail operations work for the Americas, with a focus on using advanced analytics to transform retail store operations, supply chains, and procurement processes. That is a mouthful. Praveen, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me today. It's great to be here.
Now, anybody that listens to this show already understands why I wanted to speak with Praveen. McKinsey has just opened, one of the most exciting new stores in the country, if you're a retail nerd like I am. And it is called the Modern Retail Collective in Mall of America. But I don't want to start there. I want to go back a little bit. Praveen, obviously, a company like McKinsey, which I'm sure you'll explain a little bit about what McKinsey is, if there's anybody out there that doesn't already know, they didn't just toss the keys to some random guy off the street for something as important as the Modern Retail Collective. So if you wouldn't mind taking just a minute and explaining to everybody kind of who you are and how you got to sit in a seat where a company like McKinsey would throw those keys at you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, I'm a partner at McKinsey. For those who may be less familiar, we are one of the largest global consultancies in the world. And so we work with leading institutions across, every industry. Me specifically, I've been at McKinsey for 11 years. I spend almost all of my time in the retail sector within them. And even within retail, my passion's always been, in the store. And so I spend most of my time helping retail clients think through essentially how do you take that next step at the store, whether it might be improving the customer experience you deliver, whether it's thinking through new ways to drive growth, or thinking through other ways to drive profitability. And more, as you can imagine, over the last couple of years, it's really been about, technology, about the role of digital, about how to use, new and interesting ways of advanced analytics in the store. So that's a little bit about me. And then, before McKinsey, I spent a couple years on the technology and consulting side. So tech's always been, in my blood, and just more so these days.
So obviously advanced analytics is something that retailers 10 years ago probably would have just squinted at you when you asked them about it. Yep. And now obviously it's leading a lot of conversations in this world. How do you see the DNA of companies being changed when you take like an old guard legacy company versus a new direct-to-consumer company where the DTC guys are, analytics is their lifeblood, right? That's the only thing they pay attention to practically. Not to say that their customer experience and their products aren't important, but analytics to them is like breathing, versus an old guard company that is trying to play catch up in that arena. What is that like for a guy like you who is entrenched in that world? Do you enjoy working with the old guard or the new guard? Are you seeing that both of them take it, as seriously as the other? Walk me through that kind of retail DNA.
Yeah, I think it's very much what you just said, right? So there are certainly differences between, the kind of the more, the D2C players and the ones where digital is much more kind of embedded in their DNA. But, it's no longer an old versus new guard, right? Everybody knows this is important. And even with a lot of the legacy retailers, a lot of the analytics work, it started off in pockets, right? Things like changing the way you might think about pricing, changing your assortment strategy, some of the supply chain pieces, right? Like thinking about how much product you need where. So it started off as kind of as functional excellence in a couple areas. But over the last couple of years, it really is becoming, far more cross-functional and more of a central capability, right? And I think a lot of it is the customers are demanding it, right? So it's no longer, is it in my DNA or not? It's that I have to go do this. Customers, as you shop online, right? Think about the experience you get, the websites. You get the sense that they know you, right? You're not having to navigate through thousands of products to find something that's relevant for you. And so customers, when they walk in the store, it's a lot harder, but they expect you to know them. And they expect you to be able to, share that relevant experience. And they have a far less patience for, an inconsistent experience where one person might deliver one idea and another person might deliver another. And so, you're seeing much more of that go throughout these organizations. But it's, there are certainly retailers that are far more advanced than others on it.
So you just touched on something. I did a podcast a week or so ago that I haven't even released yet, but it was a lot about data. And obviously analytics is, just a fancy way of saying we're looking at a lot of data. How do you see this kind of data battle or push and pull that is going to happen, is already happening and is going to happen, where on one side, data and analytics is, exceptional, right? Like I turn on Instagram and they know that I'm a big car nerd, or that I like, a certain brand of shirt or jacket, and they're showing me cool stuff that I would be interested in. But on the kind of the more insidious side, if they know that, they know everything. Like how do you see this kind of balance of data helping personalization versus, wait a minute, that's a little too far, that's a little creepy?
Yeah, it's
and obviously we'll stick to the retail side. We won't get into election tampering. We'll just stick to sticks and bricks.
Perfect. And look, it is a real question that everybody is battling, right? It's something that, as we talk about, when we get to talking about the collective, I can share some of what we went through and the decisions we had to make, because it's very much in the same vein. I'd say most of my retail clients are still trying to find that right balance, right? But the starting point was so far away from in-store personalization that there was a lot of room to go before, you got into anything resembling, what you just said about creepiness, right? Because, if you think about this, most stores look the same across the country, right? Everyone's been talking about localization, but not many retailers have really cracked the nut. And then within a store, the experience that most people get is quite similar, right? If I walk in versus you walked in, we would get a very similar experience today, because that's all we've really equipped our associates to do. And so I think we're just at the beginning of using these analytics to do very interesting things in the store, which both makes life easier for the associate, but delivers a much better experience for the customer. And the creepy factor that you talked about, it's real, and I think everyone's worried about it. But so far, I feel like we're so far away from that for most of these retailers that, it's not quite yet an issue.
So walk me through just kind of a baseline analytics. Like if you come into, let's stay away from the direct to consumer, because those guys, they have it down to a science. But if you're going into it kind of an old guard retailer who might not be as sophisticated as certainly you are, or one of these new brands, like what are kind of the sign your name on the SAT level, help, guidance, sophistication level that you can bring? Like what are the check the box kind of issues that you like to get these guys up to speed on, or maybe a success story in the past that you can tell that a retailer listening to this might turn a light bulb on for?
Yep. So it's as you can imagine, right? It's a range of types of problems that that we believe analytics can help bring new insights to. So maybe I'll pick a couple, so I don't bore you with a laundry list of them. But if you think more on the commercial side, right? So things like am I pricing the products correctly, or do I have the right assortment in the store? Right. These have historically been more art than science. Right. And it's, we certainly don't want to take away the magic of what the merchants bring to the table, because that is ultimately what makes a brand special. But there is a lot more that, that the data can help inform these days. Right. So how do I think about making sure I have the right sizes, by store? Right. I'm not going to send the same size run to every single store anymore, because that's not the way the demographics shake out. Right. A store in Miami may have a very different size profile than a store in, somewhere else in the country. And so really thinking through sizes and colors and which products do customers care about, is a very important thing. Like one of the things in our store, so Kendra Scott is one of our partners that I'll tell you more about as we talk about our store. One of the interesting things about Kendra is they have an incredible assortment, right? They have lots of different versions of their products, a dozen different colors, different lengths, and you can customize this to make it feel right for you. The flip side of that is, if you can imagine trying to carry all that assortment in the store is challenging. And so using the analytics to figure out what you need to have in the store versus what's enough for the customer to get a sense of, of the brand and of the product that they would then be willing to go buy online. like that's challenging math, right? And very, very important math, right? It ultimately, impacts whether or not a customer engages with your brand, whether or not they buy from you. Those kinds of things, right? Or things that really you couldn't solve a couple years ago, but now we're able to. So that's probably one flavor. Another flavor is if you think about, more on the operations side, the challenge of where to keep your inventory, right? How much do I keep in the distribution center? How do I think of my store as a node in the, in distribution? Where is it okay to be out of stock versus where is it absolutely essential that I have every product available? Where am I willing to ship from, right? The old days of shipping everything from your distribution center are gone. If you really want to optimize how you distribute, it's a combination of the shipping costs themselves, the labor cost to be able to fulfill that, but also where are you at risk of running out, right? If I have way too much product somewhere, it might actually be better to ship from there, even if the shipping costs are higher, because I reduce the risk of markdowns. And so if you think of this complex like math of combining, inventory location, shipping costs, labor costs, risk of markdown, all of those pieces have to come together to be able to make sure that, you deliver at the right price. All of those things, right, for me is another big example of advanced analytics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have heard a lot of chatter lately that talks about kind of who is going to figure out the supply chain war, right? I mean, Amazon obviously rethought supply chain on the same scale and logistics, obviously, as Walmart did. I mean, Walmart completely revolutionized the way that works. Now Amazon is completely revolutionizing it again. Talk to me a little bit about that. Who is doing the best job, and how is that going to affect every single part of our purchasing process in the future? Like, what is your take on that?
Yep. Yeah, I mean, so I think, the macro trend is customer expectations are fundamentally changing, right? And so the notion of, I'm going to sit and wait 5 to 7 days and maybe I'll pay for shipping. And then if I don't like it, maybe I'll pay to send it back to you. Like that's gone, right? And, I remember talking to clients a few years ago saying that the customer will soon expect 2-day delivery. Like that's stale now, right? I mean, pretty soon it's kind of 1 day, or maybe even
on demand.
faster than that.
Yeah, exactly.
On demand, exactly, right? And so, I'd say the big box retailers in general are able to do a lot more in terms of using the store as a distribution center, encouraging people to come into the store and really, do a lot in terms of leveraging that, that store itself. So I think, I won't go into specific retailers, but I think there's a lot of interesting things as you look across the big box grocers, the specialty big box players, some of the department stores. I think, not that anybody's completely figured it out, but there's a lot of really good experimentation going on saying, my version of this can't be putting a distribution center everywhere. My version of this has to be combining my current supply chain, with the store itself. If I think about mall-based retail, it's a very different challenge, right? They just don't have the volume, the scale, the cash to be able to go and put these big distribution centers in every major metropolitan area. And so for them, I think the jury's still out in terms of what their version of this is going to be, right? I know many of them are exploring partnerships. They're talking about, could they actually work together to do something different? Could they partner with, some of the logistics providers out there? How do we actually think about, shipping from the store? What does that mean in terms of how much product we have? Right? If you think of the legacy model, it's everything that gets shipped to the store makes it to the shelf. Maybe that isn't the world where a big part of that is then going to end up getting shipped to the customer. And so I think there's a lot of experimentation going on, but I think the answer is less clear in terms of where that'll shake out.
So, I mean, what would you do if you had, this is going to be, Praveen's store, right? What would you do? Obviously, I guess Modern Retail Collective. We'll tease that for another few minutes. I mean, if you were going to do a big retail center, I mean, would you try to figure out? Let's just use grocery, right? Would you try to do a small little 2,000 square foot store in a major metro area, and a big, warehouse somewhere where you're paying $5 a foot in rent, and you have some kind of last mile delivery service? I mean, what do you think the future looks like? Because right now you still have a ton of department stores that are in 50,000 square feet. You still have a ton of grocery stores that are in 30 to 80,000 square feet. You still have a lot of these big retailers that it's hard for me to envision a world where all that just evaporates. So
Totally agree.
what do you think the next step is, or if it was Praveen's store, how would you set it up? Dig a little deeper into this kind of logistics supply chain, because I think it's a massive question that everybody's wrestling with.
Yeah, I mean, so if you stick with the grocery example, right, I think the answer is going to be it's going to take several things to really do this the right way, right? So it can't be a one-size-fits-all answer. And so what I mean by that is there are going to be markets where delivery will continue to grow, right? There will be markets where honestly anything other than click and collect will be hard to imagine the economics ever working, right? Especially as you get into more of your kind of suburban, rural areas. But in terms of how to actually do what you're talking about, I think you're going to see a few things. I think you're going to see more of, call it, the micro fulfillment models, right? Where I'm able to now fill the order, in the back room of the store or in a small, mini distribution center, very close to the market, in a much more cost efficient way. Right. So I have retail clients who are thinking about, how do you bring distribution center like capabilities into the back room of the store? So I could imagine over time you actually start to see a little bit more space in the average grocery store dedicated to the back room. Right. Similar to what I was saying a few minutes before. Again, today the model is everything that comes in the back room makes it to the shelf, and then I have somebody walk up and down the aisles picking product, right, putting it in a bag and
right. That seems antiquated now. And when you walk into the grocery store and there's all those like reach-in coolers on the front and it's clunky and people are like, moving carts around it, you can definitely tell they were just on the wrong side of that decision when they designed the store.
Yeah, but you have to remember that even a couple years ago, right, the data suggested that grocery might be 2 or 3% online at most, right? So when most of these retailers were designing these stores, there wasn't really a belief that that online would pick up in the food side as fast as it has. And so I think there's a little bit of this. We built stores for a particular reason. We know they're important. They're not going away. But how do we try to retrofit this, but not do it in a way that disrupts the customer? And so I think you're seeing, which is what you're seeing today, right? So I do think that's going to have to change a fair bit over time, right? Being able to have better automation type capabilities in the store to fill and so forth. So that's probably one node. The second is right, similar to, you see a lot more of this in the UK, for example, right? But much more kind of dark stores or mini distribution centers where you can fill a portion of your volume through those as well. And then I think you're going to continue to see a mix of kind of last mile models, right? Where some might be delivery directly, some might be through kind of the Instacarts of the world. And I think that kind of mix of models is going to have to exist because the economics, by market are very different, right? It's much easier if we were in France or the UK where the market has kind of moved to one model. That just isn't the case here.
So speaking, I would get my podcaster badge revoked in retail if I didn't at least touch on the retail apocalypse kind of clickbait phrase that's out there. But I want to hear from you. What do you think is broken in big retail? Because obviously there are bankruptcies, there are store closings. The data that I read says that a big portion of the closing percentages are a few brands that were way over leveraged and are closing a ton of stores. I'd love to hear your take on that data. But there is something broken. What do you think is broken in big retail? And how can the new wave of retail, the direct-to-consumer, the Warby Parkers of the world, et cetera, learn from these past mistakes?
Absolutely. I mean, so I am very much along the lines of what you just said, right? Where I do believe the apocalypse is overblown, right? I think the store will fundamentally be an important part of how we all shop, whether that is actually transacting or influencing the transaction. Stores are very important. With all that said, in the U.S. we are overstored, right? And so there will be some sort of shakeout. But the stat I saw, I think along the lines of where you were going, is something like 60% of the lost square footage over the last couple of years was led by 6 bankruptcies, right? Sears, Toys R Us, and companies like that. So yes, we've lost a lot of square footage, but it really is being driven by a couple large retailers versus kind of the bottom, falling out from underneath us. Right. In terms of what a lot of these are doing, right? So for me, the conversation I often have with retailers is, if you think of when these stores were built and what the P&L looked like then versus today, it's very different. Yet the model hasn't changed, right? So every every couple points of sales that shifts online, if you don't change anything, right, typically the math would say that the store is, call it 400 to 500 basis points less profitable than it was. Yet, if you look at most of these stores, everything looks the same, right? The way they stock the shelves, the labor model is mostly the same, right? You have the same number of people working. You incent the stores on the same types of things as you used to. All of those things haven't changed, right? One of the things that that we have found in our, or maybe an example I'll share is, the number of retailers that I've seen who have given stores tools to do things like help a customer find a product online if it's in the store, but then they don't give the associate credit for the online sale, right? So it's not fair, right? And so how do you actually think
Antiquated,
about, rethinking the value of the store, right? So one of the things in the collective that we've been excited about, which again, we didn't figure out on day one, right? We've had to pivot as we learn, but we are collecting far more, email addresses. We have far more people posting on social media about the cool experiences that they've done in the store. All of those things really, really matter, right? In terms of building that long-term customer relationship. Giving the associates credit for those things as much as a sale, or arguably even more than the sale, right, is a very different way of thinking about your business. And I think that's where, the D2C guys have figured it out quickly. But the legacy retailers haven't, right? Even things like we're seeing a pickup in Minneapolis zip codes of online sales for some of our brands, right? Which is very exciting. The average retailer wouldn't look at that, right? They wouldn't tell their associates that. The associate wouldn't get credit if it was a commission-based structure for that. And so I think all of those things are really important and are something that has to change pretty quickly.
So what other metrics do you think weren't a part of the conversation 5 years ago that now should be? Like, one I've heard a lot is, cost to acquire a new customer and, lifetime value of a customer, which are very different from a legacy brand versus a direct-to-consumer brand. We spoke with the guys that started Casper a little while back, and the amount of money that they spend, per customer is wild, and the amount that they're spending to get their net out there is really interesting. So what are some of the metrics that are near and dear to your heart, or that maybe somebody doing business 10 years ago would have never thought of, but now should be a part of every conversation?
Yeah. So, everything you said, I agree with. I think maybe one or two that I'd add. So one is, if you think of, if you stick within the four walls where most of our conversation's been, historically, most stores measure, if you think about how much labor they deploy as an example, right? They really think about this in terms of, every customer that walks in needs 5 minutes of service, right? You do the simple math and that's your labor model. A lot of the work we've been doing recently is to say, actually, that's an antiquated way of thinking about this. And really what I'm trying to figure out is, where can I best deploy my precious labor to drive conversion or improve customer experience? Which is a very different way of thinking about it, right? It might mean there are certain times of the day when I'm actually, I might actually have less labor in the store, but there's other times when I know that adding that labor really matters. Or if you think of a big box retailer, there's certain departments where the way people shop really needs a lot more help than they do today. Whereas in other places, it might be a much higher volume department, but customers actually don't need as much help. And so it's a very different way of thinking about it. And so we call it, kind of conversion-driven scheduling, right? But really thinking about the relationship between the associate and ultimately, what conversion that person is helping drive. For me is one of my favorite ones. And it leads to some radically different ways of deploying labor. It'd be different if this was years ago when you had plenty, you had the luxury of being able to deploy a lot of, labor. But as all the pricing pressures have come through and the P&L has gotten challenged, we know we have to be much smarter about where we put our people. And so for me, that's probably, the biggest one that you didn't mention.
Yeah, it reminds me, a friend of mine who is in this space as well, we were talking the other day about this similar question and about labor in particular. And the analogy they used I thought was pretty powerful. They were like, when I walk into a department store and there's just stacks and racks and crap in every direction, and somebody walks up and is like, hey, what can I help you with? Hey, have you seen these jeans on sale? Oh, wait, there's a shirt over there. It's a very shotgun approach. Like, you just kind of throw some poor associate to the wolves and say, hey, try to figure out what in the world this person could possibly be here for, and show them a bunch of stuff, throw against the wall and see what sticks, versus the Sephora model and how they deploy labor And this part kind of comes from my wife, or from certainly, I'm not in Sephora as much as other people would be, but it's like, hey, how are you? Like, oh my goodness, you should try this because it worked for me. I don't like this one, even though it's more expensive. Your skin tone would work with this, and yada yada. Using labor in kind of a sniper rifle kind of approach, and to create that personalization, and to add value is a very different thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. A couple years ago, I worked with one of the big box apparel players, and when you walk in and you do the observations, right, you see their customer service scores weren't great. You talk to the associates, and one of the things that was most striking that I'll never forget is the number of people that told us that they were scared to engage a customer because they haven't had the training. Customers know more about the brand story. They know more about what's online. They'll know more about if a certain brand is carrying something in that department store, but or isn't carrying something in that department store, but is in the flagship stores. All those things are really hard questions, right? And we just don't train people as much as we used to. And so the unlock, the traditional thing was to beat them over the head for not delivering the right customer experience. But what this really showed was we aren't providing them with the tools to actually engage the customer, right? If the product changes, how do I help you understand what that is? It's interesting, right? If a customer, based off the first couple of things they engage with, you can actually start to know a lot about who they are and the types of things they like to do, right? That is really hard to teach, thousands of people how to think like that, right? It's just not the way we're wired.
Right.
And so how do you actually give them the tools to say, if I touch this product and this product, here's the 5 next things that I'm most likely, that I would most likely be excited by. And so those are the kinds of places, where I think we have a huge opportunity in stores to be able to help equip our associates with new data and insights.
That's really interesting. So I want to ask you one more question, and then I want to move to the Modern Retail Collective and have you introduce that. What do you think AR is going to do in the next, call it 3 to 5 years, in the retail experience, both at home and in the brick and mortar store? Is it as big as people are claiming, or do you think it's still a wait and see? Talk to me about augmented reality and how you think it'll affect retail experience.
Yeah, so I am personally very, very excited about it. And I try to separate my personal passion for just fun technologies like that with kind of the P&L impact of it. But in our store, for instance, we have augmented reality that's being used to help you try on different jewelry, and the uptick that we've gotten from that is incredible. And 4 or 5 weeks in, right, it's pretty easy for me to look you in the eye and say the tech works and it's powerful. And so it's one of the things that has been most obviously engaging to customers. It's a fairly low cost technology. So that in that particular example, I've been very bullish about it. I'm also starting to see it in a whole lot of other use cases, right, which might not be as customer facing. So things like, one of the challenges that a lot of these retailers are thinking about is, as you start putting in new technologies, as you start automating processes, what happens if it breaks? Right? What happens, in the old world, if something broke, you could still work your way around it. Now it's really hard to ask your associates to try to, troubleshoot why the, augmented reality mirror went down. And so
just unplug it and plug it back
retailers,
in, man. That's always the answer.
Exactly. And if that doesn't work, right, then you're in trouble. Or things like, if you have more technology in the back room to help you, replenish faster, right? What happens if that goes down? Or, you've seen the automated drive-throughs now, right, that some of the fast food retailers are doing. What happens if that goes down? It's very different than being able to, throw more, kind of associates at it. And so you're seeing a lot of interesting things where the augmented reality is actually helping change the way you train your people. And so if I have, an AR headset on, I can actually help you troubleshoot live in terms of what to go do, right? Or, really help you understand how to fix something, even if you're not, I saw a version of this where if a POS machine goes down, it would help you understand how to fix this thing without having to get an electrician in, unless it's a very major issue, right? So I've seen AR-based training, right, where we can actually help customers or help our associates practice, dealing with a challenging customer. All of those things I think are really important and will change the way, it's different than taking kind of a web-based training because it's just not a real environment, right? Whereas if you can actually start engaging with an angry customer, it's very good practice. And so I am very bullish on AR, right? It's the cost curves have come down. You could do AR off of very low cost hardware. So I think I think we're going to see a lot more of it both in the store and at home.
Yeah, it seems like it could be a real game changer. Okay, so let's talk about why we're both here. Let's talk about Modern Retail Collective. Now, I'm going to give you the canned answer of what it is, but then I want you to come back and really unpack what this store is, what it means, why the heck everybody would spend a lot of money and a lot of brain power to put something like this together. And I want you to talk a little bit about the why behind it. So the Collective, as it's known, is a collaborative venture between McKinsey, Mall of America, retail brands, and technology providers like Microsoft, Zebra, Square, and SmartTrack. It's a real shoppable multi-brand store where retailers can test the latest technologies with actual customers. So that's the press release answer. Now, Praveen, would you tell me kind of what it is and the why behind it and why you guys are so excited about it?
Yep, absolutely. So it's for me, it's a couple things, right? One is, very much in line with what we're talking about. I believe the retail apocalypse is overblown, but I do believe retailers need to change the model. And this is our way of sharing our perspective on what the store of the future can look like. So that's one. I think two is this world is changing so quickly, and really understanding what the new technology is, understanding how to get value out of that technology. We couldn't do without getting our hands dirty, right? We really had to see what worked and what didn't. Understanding how the associate incentives have to change. All those things are really hard to do without actually, turning this thing on and seeing how customers engage with it, how it works in the real world. And so for us, this was a great way of both sharing that perspective, but also learning a whole lot about this, about this new world.
So walk people really through what it is. Like if I were to walk into Mall of America and walk into the Collective, what would I see? What would I experience? Talk to me a little bit about the consumer-facing aspect.
Yep, absolutely. So from the outside, it looks like every other mall-based specialty retailer, right? And one of the big design choices we made is, do we want it to look like a tech store or do we want it to look like a traditional store? And as the decision we made was we wanted it to look like a regular store where you walked in and engaged not because of the technology, but because you were excited about the product. And so a lot of the technology that we have is very subtle, right? It's things that we believe help associates deliver that better experience or help us collect the right information to improve, how we merchandise product and things like that. So it was a big design choice, right? One of the things that we heard initially was, I was expecting giant screens and robots and things like that. Whereas honestly, a lot of our effort has been much more on subtle technologies that we believe are very important. The second thing that kind of, to get into our store, it was technology that we believe is ready for showtime, right? So it isn't interesting if this is something you can put in your flagship store in Manhattan, but not in the rest of your network. And so a lot of this is really tech that we believe, if it works, can be scaled quickly. So if you're the customer, right, with all that said, as you walk in, you'll see 4 brands. So our brand partners are Kendra Scott, Third Love, Aleve, and Type A. And so as you walk in, you'll see essentially 4 parts of the store, each merchandised with kind of the best of each of those brands. We then have a set of technologies all around the store that help you engage with those brands in different ways. So for instance, with Kendra Scott, as I talked about earlier in this conversation, we have a few different ways to get to know the brand, get to know their products. So we have the augmented reality mirror where you can try on different products and see what you like. We also have the color bar where you can actually, we're trying to understand how customers shop this category. And so you can start with color, right? It's the thing that Kendra Scott's known for. They have, a dozen beautiful colors. And so a customer can take a stone, tap an RFID tag and start to engage with the catalog of products through that way. If you go to Third Love, for instance, it's a very different experience, right? Really, Third Love's magic is around helping a woman find the right size. And so there, what the associate will do is help you engage with the Third Love, what they call the Fit Finder. But it's essentially an advanced analytics algorithm to help people find the right size for them. And so there, it's less around, the smart mirrors and things like that, given, the intimates category. It's really around helping you find, the product that's right for you. We also have things like, the ability to pay with crypto. We have, very low cost NFC tags embedded throughout the store that helps people engage, with the product. And so, with most phones, right, if you think about the average retailer, the only real way to engage with product is typically through, the app for that particular retailer. The challenge is almost, most of the population won't have that retailer's app. And so we wanted a way that everybody that walks in who wanted to could engage simply by tapping their phone against the tag. And so what's really interesting about that is if you're a customer and you tap against that, right, you can start to hear, you can start to see brand stories. You can start to learn more just by tapping it. And if you're somebody that doesn't want, that wants to kind of self-serve around the store, you could do it by yourself. If you want somebody that wants help, an associate can actually deliver that experience standing next to you, right, helping you use this technology. Over time, we want to use that same technology where if you're an associate and you tap your phone against it, it gives you tips on how to sell or, answers to common questions that customers might ask. And so it's probably one of the things that, is arguably least sexy in the store, but one that I'm most excited about. It's a couple cents for these tags, and it changes the way that customers can engage with the product. So that's all the customer-facing tech. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No, so if you were to categorize the collective, would it be, and it's okay to say both, would it be more incubator for new cutting edge, direct to consumer brands that want to dip their toe in the water in a, high tech environment, or would it be more of a test bed for, I am Ralph Lauren and want to roll out, technology throughout 100 stores. Let me go see it in the real world and figure out how it can work for me. Is it a combination of both? Like what do you guys feel is kind of the interesting secret sauce here?
It's more the latter. And for me, it's less around I'm Ralph Lauren and I want to try a new technology. It's more, I'm a retailer, whether that is a traditional, or a traditional legacy retailer or a D2C player, but I have a particular business problem that I'm trying to solve, right? So, for companies like Kendra, it was really around how do I drive higher engagement with the brand? How do I drive conversion, but do it in a way that I can't have every single product that I can sell in the store, right? That was kind of the core problem, right? For brands like Third Love, it was really around, it's a wide assortment of products. What is the importance of engaging customers in a brick and mortar setting to help them, understand my brand, find the right product, potentially reduce the number of returns I get, all of those kinds of things. And so for us, it was really around tech that helps answer that particular business problem, right? Another one that we're doing is we have a whole lot of, back-end technologies that's really helping us understand how customers navigate, right? Where's the best place to keep your product in the store? How do customers shop the store? Right? All of those things will then help retailers figure out the optimal way of merchandising their stores.
So what have been the early kind of lessons that you've learned either from the store level or from getting this up and running? Like, man, we thought this was going to be really successful when we blew it, or wow, this was kind of a throwaway piece that turned out to be really important. What has been something that you've learned that maybe you didn't expect?
Yep. So maybe a couple things. So I think one is, when we set out, we trained our store team, our associates, in the way every other retailer would train for a traditional store. So a lot of the things that we talked about around the different metrics, around for instance, for Third Love, we now know, we didn't know at the time, that the associate's role should be as much about having the customer engage with the tech versus the traditional way of potentially engaging a customer. And so changing the role of the associate, changing the way we train our associates, changing what we get, how they get credit, right? They, it's not just sales, but the email addresses and the social media posts, all of those kinds of things. Like that to me was probably, the biggest learning. The second was, we were really looking at the impact that we were having in the four walls. And things like understanding the online sales of, in the Minneapolis area from these products, or understanding what happens to Kendra Scott's other stores in Minneapolis when we opened our store. We weren't doing a good enough job collecting that information on day one that we've now quickly learned and are much better seeing the full picture, right, that we probably didn't do before. And the third thing that we're probably still trying to figure out is we intentionally wanted people to come in, again, not because of the technology. We wanted them to come in because, it was an interesting store with beautiful product. I still think we're trying to find the right mix of, what really draws you into the store. How do we explain what the collective is? Why do we want you to come in the store? Because obviously the more people that we get to visit and engage, the better our insights are, and the better the impact is for our partners.
So what has been the one big takeaway what was like your aha moment? I mean, you've talked about analytics, you've talked about lessons, but what was the golden nugget of coming out with a collective, the thing that you think you'll be able to take from this really cool, interesting, bizarre retail experiment and really help people that either have been in business for 50 years or, are going to open a business next year? Like, what has been, if there's been one kind of aha moment that you've learned from doing this, what do you think you can take and help your clients and your consumers in the future?
So for me, it's probably one thing with the caveat of it's early days and still working through, all of the data and the analytics and things. But for me, one of the questions, every retailer struggles with is how do I drive conversion? And what's been interesting here is, and ultimately that is the core question that we're trying to test in this use case, right? And so what's been interesting is getting underneath that question in our store. And so for some brands, what we're seeing is really it's about if I can get you to touch that second or third or fourth product, that's really what it is, right? It's it's around helping you better engage and giving you a reason, to learn about the second or third product. And so, for instance, like the data shows a clear correlation where if I can get you past that second or third product, I've got you, right? I've gotten you excited with the brand. I have a much higher, chance of having you buy something. And so if you're a retailer, right, that particular retailer, now you know what I'm solving for, right? I'm not trying to, go solve world peace. I'm trying to get you to engage, that second or third product. For other brands, it was really around the depth of engagement. So it didn't matter how many products you touched and felt. It was around, if I can get you to kind of hear the brand story for 45 seconds versus 15 seconds, if I could get you to that, to the fourth page on the Kendra Scott Smart Mirror, all of those things, really, it made a huge difference in terms of driving conversion. So again, if you're Kendra Scott and you see that information, right, you now know what you're solving for. And then, maybe the third thing, and it's a little bit harder to tell given our store is small, right? We have lots of great associates working, but we're starting to see some real differences in how customers engage. And so there are some customers that really want to engage in the technology, and that's ultimately driving them to learn about the brands. There's others that want to go right to the product. And similarly, there's customers that want to engage with the associate, and there's ones that don't. We're now starting to pick up some really interesting data to say by customer segment, how different do people shop, right? Where does technology matter and doesn't, and how do we give associates clues to pick up on that? Which you could imagine is a really important thing, right? Going back to your department store example, right? How do I make sure that I'm not just throwing, the kitchen sink at somebody, but using kind of some clues of what I'm picking up on to be able to deliver that tailored experience?
It's incredible how far retail has come, and that we're having these conversations about smart mirrors and advanced analytics that are driving why people buy a blue shirt versus a green shirt. It's unbelievable.
Yep.
Praveen, you've been so gracious with your time. I know how busy you are. Do me a favor real quick. Explain to people how they can learn more about the store, about McKinsey, how they can connect with you, and just let the listeners know how they can learn more or connect with you. And again, thank you for sharing your time and your knowledge and your insight with us.
And Adam, thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. If folks want to learn more about what we're doing, there's probably a couple ways of doing it. So one is, if you look me up on LinkedIn, we'd be more than happy to share more about what we're doing. You'll also see, I've posted our website, our blog. You'll see a couple-minute video on there, which will help bring the experience to life. And we're always looking for new partners who are excited to try and learn new things. So, if there are people out there that want to do that, we'd love to talk to you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again, Praveen, for joining us. I've learned a ton, and I'm sure our listeners have as well. I just want to take a second to acknowledge you guys taking time out of your day to come and share your insights with us. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. This was a lot of fun.